I want to tell you about the day I became a ghost in my own home. Not literally, of course. But that's what it felt like when I realized my wife couldn't see me anymore. She looked right through me, her eyes focused on something, or someone, far more interesting on her phone screen. I just didn't know yet that the person on the other end of those messages was about to destroy both our lives, just in very different ways. My name is David West, and this is the story of how my wife traded me for a sugar daddy, and how I made sure they both paid the price. It started small, the way these things always do. Jessica and I had been married for 8 years. We met in college, got married young, built what I thought was a solid life together. I worked as a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. The pay was good, around $120K a year. We had a nice 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, 2 cars, took vacations once a year. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable. Jessica worked as an executive assistant at a financial consulting firm downtown. She was good at her job, organized, professional, the kind of person who remembered everyone's coffee order and never missed a deadline. At least that's who she used to be. The changes started about 6 months before everything fell apart. She began working late more often. Weekend work calls became routine. She started dressing differently for the office. Designer labels I knew we couldn't afford appearing in her closet. When I asked about them, she'd wave me off with vague explanations about sales or bonuses I never heard about. "You wouldn't understand, David," she'd say, applying lipstick in the mirror. "It's about making an impression in the corporate world. Image matters." I let it slide. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. Then came the phone obsession. Jessica had always been on her phone, sure, but this was different. She'd smile at the screen with this secretive little grin, fingers flying across the keyboard. When I'd walk into a room, she'd tilt the phone away or quickly close whatever she was looking at. "Just work stuff," she'd explain. "Always work stuff." Our intimacy dried up completely. We went from making love a few times a week to maybe once a month, and even then she seemed distracted, going through the motions. When I tried to talk about it, she blamed stress, exhaustion, hormones, everything except the truth. The final straw should have been when I found the lingerie receipt. High-end stuff from an expensive boutique downtown, nearly $800. I'd never seen any of it. When I confronted her, she got angry, actually angry, like I was the one doing something wrong. "Why are you going through my receipts?" she demanded. "Can't I buy myself something nice without being interrogated?" $800, Jess. "When did you even wear this?" "That's none of your business." "God, David, you're so controlling lately." Controlling. That's what I'd become for noticing my wife was lying to me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I came home early from work. Unusual for me, but I'd wrapped up a project ahead of schedule. Jessica's car was in the driveway, which surprised me since she'd said she'd be working until 8. I walked into our house and heard her voice from the home office upstairs. She was on the phone and she was laughing. Not her polite work laugh, but the real one, the one I hadn't heard in months. Maybe years. I should have announced myself. I should have called out that I was home. But something stopped me. Some instinct that told me I needed to hear this. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," Jessica was saying, her voice soft and intimate. "David is clueless. He's so wrapped up in his little tech world, he barely notices I exist anymore." My stomach dropped. "I know, baby, I know. Just 2 more months. You said June, right? After the fiscal year closes, you'll have everything arranged with your accountant, and then we can finally be together. No more hiding." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Of course I'm sure. I love you, Richard. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're everything David isn't: successful, powerful, ambitious. He's comfortable with mediocrity. You're not. That's why I'm doing this." Another pause. "I'll file in May. My lawyer said it's straightforward since we don't have kids. I'll probably get half the house, some of his retirement fund. It'll be enough to start over. And then once you're divorced and we're together, none of that will even matter. You've promised me the life I deserve, Richard. The life I should have had all along." She laughed again, that beautiful laugh I'd fallen in love with a decade ago. "I can't wait either. The house in Aspen sounds incredible. Yes, I'll start looking at furniture for the penthouse. I want everything perfect for when we move in together. Okay, baby. I'll see you Thursday at the hotel. Room 2404, right? Okay. I love you too." I heard her end the call, and I very quietly walked back out the front door. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what I just heard. My wife was leaving me. She'd been planning it for months, apparently. And she was leaving me for someone named Richard. someone rich enough to promise her penthouses and houses in Aspen. The rage came first, hot and blinding. I wanted to storm back in there and confront her, demand answers, make her explain how the woman I'd loved had turned into someone so cold and calculating. But beneath the rage was something else, hurt so deep it felt like I couldn't breathe. And beneath that, a cold, analytical part of my brain that started planning. If Jessica wanted to trade me in for a richer model, fine. But she wasn't going to do it on her terms. Not anymore. I did my research that night. Jessica had mentioned Thursday at a hotel, room 2404. She'd mentioned the name Richard, someone successful and powerful. I thought about who she worked with, who she might have met through her job at the financial consulting firm. Then I remembered the company Christmas party 4 months earlier. Jessica's boss had introduced us to one of their major clients, Richard Ashford, founder and CEO of Ashford Capital Management, a private equity firm managing over $2 billion in assets. He'd been charming, mid-40s, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my car. He'd shaken my hand and smiled at me with perfect white teeth while his own wife stood beside him, quiet and elegant in a black dress. That had to be him. I did some digging online. Richard Ashford was married to Caroline Ashford, née Harrison. The Harrisons were old money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them at Ivy League universities. Caroline's trust fund had reportedly provided the initial capital for Richard's firm. They'd been married for 18 years and had 3 children. So Richard was promising my wife a new life while still very much married to the woman whose money had built his empire. Interesting. I hired a private investigator on Wednesday morning. Cost me $3,000 I couldn't really afford, but I needed proof. The PI, a former cop named Dennis Walsh, was efficient and discreet. By Friday, I had photographs of Jessica and Richard entering the Grand Lux Hotel on Thursday evening. More photos of them in the hotel restaurant having dinner. A photo of them kissing in the elevator. Dennis also provided their check-in information. Richard had been renting room 2404 on a standing weekly reservation for the past 5 months. Always Thursday evenings. Always under a corporate account that would look like legitimate business expenses. You want to know what's interesting? Dennis said when he delivered the report. I ran a standard background check on this guy. His wife, Caroline Ashford? She's the real money in that family. The prenup he signed is apparently ironclad. If he gets divorced, especially for infidelity, he loses his position at the company and his access to her family's investment network. He'd be lucky to walk away with $5 million and his reputation in tatters. How do you know about the prenup? I don't, not officially. But these old money families? They protect their assets. I've seen this story before. Caroline Ashford's father was a ruthless businessman. He wouldn't have let his daughter marry some upstart without guarantees. An idea started forming in my mind. Dennis, do you think Caroline Ashford knows about the affair? Hard to say. Rich wives sometimes look the other way if it's discreet. But this doesn't sound discreet. Your wife thinks he's leaving his family for her. What would you do if you were me? Dennis looked at me with something like pity. Me? I'd burn it all down. But that's why I'm divorced. I didn't confront Jessica. That was the hardest part. Going home every day, eating dinner with her, sleeping in the same bed, pretending everything was normal while she planned her exit. But I needed time to put my plan in motion. First, I secured our finances. I moved half our savings into a separate account she didn't know about. I collected all our financial documents, mortgage papers, investment statements. I documented everything. Her shopping sprees, the unexplained charges on our credit cards, the hotel visits I could prove through her car's GPS history that I'd started monitoring. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I called Caroline Ashford's office. It took 3 days and several attempts before I managed to reach someone useful. I couldn't just call the main number and say, "Hi, I'm having an affair with your husband." Instead, I crafted a careful message saying I had information about Richard Ashford that Mrs. Ashford would find relevant to her interests, particularly regarding her family's investments in Ashford Capital. That last part was the key. Frame it as business, not personal, and someone would listen. 2 days later, I got a call from a law office. Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious family law firms in the state. A woman with a crisp, professional voice introduced herself as Patricia Whitmore. "Mr. West, I represent Caroline Ashford. You left a message suggesting you have information about Richard Ashford's activities. Before we proceed, I need to know if this information relates to personal or business matters." "Both," I said. "Your client's husband is having an affair with my wife and has promised to leave his family for her. I thought Mrs. Ashford should know before her husband makes any moves that might affect her family's financial interests." There was a long pause. "I see. Mr. West, would you be willing to meet with me in person? I may have questions and I may need to verify certain information. I have photographs, hotel records, and recordings. And I know when and where they meet. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. West, please don't do anything yet. Don't confront your wife, don't contact Mr. Ashford, and certainly don't contact Mrs. Ashford directly. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? Patricia Whitmore's office was in a glass tower downtown, all dark wood and leather furniture that screamed money. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mr. West, she said, gesturing to a chair. Tell me everything. I laid it all out. The affair, Jessica's plans to divorce me in May, Richard's promises about the penthouse and the house in Aspen, the hotel meetings every Thursday. I showed her the photographs Dennis had taken and played her an audio recording I'd made of Jessica on the phone with Richard, planning their future together. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and steepled her fingers. Mr. West, I'm going to be frank with you. What you've brought me is valuable, very valuable, to my client. Caroline Ashford has suspected her husband of infidelity before, but he's been careful. This time he's been reckless, and your wife is the proof of that recklessness. What happens now? Now I coordinate with you. Mrs. Ashford is not a woman who tolerates being made a fool of. When she moves against her husband, she'll move decisively. But we need to do this right. The prenuptial agreement is complex, but it has clear provisions regarding infidelity. If we can prove Richard has been unfaithful, especially if we can prove he was planning to leave his family, it triggers several clauses that would be financially devastating for him. How devastating? Patricia smiled thinly. He would lose his CEO position at Ashford Capital. He would forfeit his ownership stake in the company. He would be required to repay certain loans from the Harrison Family Trust. And he would receive a minimal settlement from the divorce, enough to survive, but nowhere near enough to maintain his current lifestyle, let alone finance a penthouse and a home in Aspen for his mistress. So my wife's sugar daddy would be broke. Not broke, but no longer in a position to provide the lifestyle he's been promising. Now, Mr. West, what do you want out of this? I've been thinking about that for days. I want my wife to know what it feels like to lose everything. She's planning to take half my assets and ride off into the sunset with a millionaire. I want her to end up with nothing, no money from me, no rich boyfriend to catch her, nothing. I want her to understand that she destroyed our marriage for a fantasy. Patricia nodded slowly. I can work with that. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. This won't be clean. Your wife will know you were involved. There will be anger, possibly legal threats, definitely public humiliation for everyone involved. I'm prepared. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. The plan was surgical in its precision. First, Patricia filed a motion on behalf of Caroline Ashford for an immediate restraint of Richard Ashford's access to marital assets, citing evidence of infidelity and financial impropriety. She requested an emergency hearing, which was granted within a week. During that week, I acted normal at home. Jessica noticed nothing. She was too busy texting Richard, planning their future, counting down the days until she could file for divorce and start her new life. I, meanwhile, had been subpoenaed to testify at the Ashford divorce hearing as a witness with direct knowledge of Richard Ashford's extramarital affair. Patricia had made sure of it. The hearing was scheduled for April 15th, tax day, which felt appropriate somehow. Jessica planned to file for our divorce on May 1st, so she had no idea what was coming. On April 14th, I finally made my move. Jessica came home from work around 7, all smiles because she'd just confirmed with Richard that his lawyers were finalizing everything, and they'd be together soon. She had no idea those lawyers were actually trying to salvage what they could of his financial situation. Jess, I said as she walked into the Keatwayest, we need to talk. She immediately looked defensive. About what? About Richard Ashford. The color drained from her face. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then her expression hardened. How long have you known? Long enough. I heard you on the phone with him a few weeks ago. I know about the affair. I know about your plans to divorce me. I know about the penthouse he promised you and the house in Aspen. She crossed her arms, suddenly defiant. Fine. Then you know it's over between us. I was going to tell you next month anyway. Richard and I are in love, David. Real love. Not this comfortable, boring existence you're satisfied with. He's giving me the life I deserve. Is he? Yes. He's filing for divorce from Caroline. We're going to be together. Interesting. Because I'm testifying in his divorce hearing tomorrow morning. Jessica's face went white again. What? Caroline Ashford knows about the affair. Her lawyers subpoenaed me as a witness. I have photographs, hotel records, audio recordings of you and Richard planning your future together. I have everything, Jess. And tomorrow, I'm giving it all to a judge. You can't do that. You wouldn't. I already have. The hearing is at 9 tomorrow morning. I'm the star witness. And when the judge sees what I have, Richard is going to lose everything. His position, his company stake, his money. All of it. He won't be able to afford a studio apartment, let alone a penthouse. Jessica's hands were shaking. Why would you do this? Out of spite. No. Because you destroyed our marriage for a lie. Richard was never going to leave his wife. He was stringing you along because you were convenient. And now you're going to lose him, you're going to be humiliated, and you're going to walk away from our divorce with a lot less than you planned. What do you mean? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared and handed it to her. These are photographs of you and Richard. These are the hotel records. These are credit card statements showing you spent marital assets on lingerie and gifts for your affair partner. In our state, adultery affects the division of property. You committed adultery. You used our money to fund your affair. When we go to divorce court, the judge is going to know all of this. You'll be lucky to get 30%. Jessica opened the folder with trembling hands. As she looked through the contents, I watched her realize that her carefully planned escape had just collapsed. You bastard, she whispered. You petty, vindictive bastard. Probably. But I'm not the one who cheated. Sleep well, Jess. Big day tomorrow. I walked out of the Keatwayest and spent the night in a hotel. I didn't want to be there when the full weight of what was coming hit her. The hearing the next morning was in a private courtroom, but the testimony was brutal. Patricia Whitmore was a master of her craft. She walked me through every detail of the affair, the timeline, the hotel meetings, the promises Richard had made to Jessica. I presented the photographs, the recordings, the evidence of Richard using corporate accounts to fund his affair. Richard's lawyer tried to discredit me, suggesting I was a spurned husband making up stories. Then Patricia played the audio recording of Jessica explicitly naming Richard and discussing their plans in detail. She showed the judge the hotel records with Richard's credit card receipts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, reviewed the evidence with obvious distaste. Mr. Ashford, she said finally, I've seen a lot of messy divorces in my career, but this is particularly egregious. You signed a prenuptial agreement that included specific provisions regarding infidelity. You violated those provisions. You used marital assets and corporate resources to conduct an affair. And you made promises to your mistress about leaving your wife and children, promises you apparently had no ability to keep. Do you have anything to say? Richard, who'd been looking increasingly desperate throughout the hearing, tried to speak. Your Honor, I made mistakes. But I love my wife. This was a momentary lapse in judgment. I want to work things out with Caroline. From across the courtroom, Caroline Ashford made a sound that might have been a laugh. She looked immaculate and utterly cold, like an ice sculpture of herself. Judge Morrison was unimpressed. Mr. Ashford, I'm granting Mrs. Ashford's motion for immediate restraint of assets pending the final divorce hearing. I'm also ordering that you be removed as CEO of Ashford Capital, per the terms of your prenuptial agreement, which clearly state that infidelity results in forfeiture of your management position. I'm ordering a full audit of corporate expenses to determine if any additional marital assets were misappropriated. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down like a guillotine. Richard sat frozen in his seat as the reality of his situation crashed over him. Caroline stood, smoothed her designer skirt, and walked out without looking at him once. Patricia gathered her files with a satisfied smile. As I left the courtroom, Richard's lawyer stopped me in the hallway. I hope you're happy, he said bitterly. You just destroyed a man's life. No, I replied. He destroyed his own life. And mine. And his wife's. I just made sure everyone knew about it. The aftermath was spectacular in its devastation. Richard's removal from Ashford Capital was announced that afternoon. The company's board, controlled by Caroline's family, moved swiftly to distance themselves from the scandal. Richard's reputation in the financial world was shredded within days. The story leaked to the business press. CO ousted in affair scandal, and suddenly everyone knew. But the real damage came in the divorce itself. Over the following months, Patricia Whitmore dismantled Richard's financial life piece by piece. The prenup provisions were ironclad. Richard forfeited his equity stake in the company, worth an estimated $150 million. He was required to repay loans from the Harrison family trust totaling $12 million. He was given a settlement of $5 million, which sounds like a lot until you subtract taxes, his legal fees, and the debt repayments. Richard Ashford went from being worth over $100 million to being worth maybe $2 million, with no company, no job prospects in his industry, and 3 children he'd see every other weekend. As for Jessica, her situation was equally catastrophic. The day after the hearing, Richard stopped answering her calls. His promises of a penthouse and a life together evaporated like morning mist. Jessica tried to reach out to him dozens of times. Finally, she received a cease and desist letter from his lawyer, threatening legal action if she continued to contact him. She'd burned her marriage to the ground for a man who now wanted nothing to do with her. Our divorce proceedings began in June. Jessica had hired a lawyer who tried to argue that she deserved half of everything despite the affair. But I had too much evidence. The photographs, the hotel records, the credit card statements showing she'd spent thousands of our dollars on her affair, it all added up. In our state, adultery doesn't necessarily prevent someone from getting their share of marital assets, but it gives judges discretion in how those assets are divided, especially when marital funds were used to support the affair. Jessica had been egregious. She'd used our joint credit cards to buy lingerie, gifts, hotel dinners. Judge Howard, who presided over our divorce, was not sympathetic. "Mrs. West," he said during one of our hearings, "you conducted an affair for at least 5 months, used marital assets to support that affair, and planned to leave your husband for another man who was also married. Your conduct shows a level of deception and financial impropriety that this court cannot ignore. I'm awarding Mr. West 60% of the marital assets, including a greater share of the home equity. You will receive 40% and be responsible for your own legal fees." Jessica's face crumpled. She'd expected at least 50%, probably more. Instead, she walked away with roughly $80,000 from the home sale and half of her retirement account. Not nothing, but nowhere near what she'd planned. But the financial damage was only part of it. Jessica's reputation was destroyed. The affair had become public knowledge through the Ashford divorce. People at her company knew. Her friends knew. Her family knew. She positioned herself as Richard Ashford's future wife, and now everyone knew she'd been discarded like trash the moment things got complicated. She had to resign from her job. The scandal made it impossible to continue working at the firm that consulted with Ashford Capital. Finding new employment was difficult when potential employers Googled her name and found articles about the affair. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state to start over, working a job that paid half what she'd made before. The life she'd dreamed of, the penthouses, the luxury, the wealthy husband, was gone. She traded a comfortable, stable marriage for absolutely nothing. As for me, the experience changed me fundamentally. I won't pretend I came out unscathed. The betrayal damaged me in ways I'm still working through. Trusting someone again, opening myself up to a relationship, those things feel impossible right now. Maybe they always will. But I also learned something important. I'm not someone who takes betrayal quietly. There's a tendency in our culture to see the betrayed spouse as weak, as someone to be pitied. The common narrative is that if your partner cheats, you either forgive them or you leave them, but either way you're supposed to take the high road, be the bigger person, let karma handle the rest. I rejected that narrative completely. When Jessica betrayed me, when she planned to leave me for a richer man while taking half of everything I'd worked for, she made a calculation. She calculated that I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be too hurt or too passive to do anything but accept my fate. She was wrong. I fought back with everything I had. I used the legal system, I gathered evidence, I found allies in unexpected places. I made sure that both Jessica and Richard paid the maximum possible price for what they'd done. Some people might call that vindictive. They might say I should have just divorced Jessica quietly and moved on with my life. But those people didn't have to watch the person they loved plot their betrayal. They didn't have to hear their wife laugh about how clueless they were. They didn't have to feel the specific pain of being traded in for a richer model. I made sure Jessica felt that pain. I made sure she understood that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy someone's life and expect to walk away unscathed. And Richard? He learned that promises have prices. He'd made commitments to his wife, signed contracts, built a life on her family's money and trust. Then he'd thrown it all away for an affair with his employee, making promises he couldn't keep, thinking he was clever enough to manage both relationships. He wasn't. 2 years have passed since that hearing. I've rebuilt my life, though it looks different now. I sold the house Jessica and I shared and bought a smaller place closer to downtown. I got promoted at work. I've started dating again, cautiously, though I'm careful about who I trust. I still think about Jessica sometimes, wonder if she ever understood what she threw away. We had a good life together. Not a perfect life, not a life filled with private jets and penthouses, but a real, solid life built on partnership and shared history. She torched it because she wanted more, because some smooth-talking millionaire promised her luxury, because she thought she deserved better than what we had. I hope she's happy with her choices. I hope that when she's working her reduced-pay job in whatever city she fled to, when she's alone in her apartment without the wealthy husband she'd counted on, when she's watching her peers move forward in their lives and careers while she starts over from scratch, I hope she remembers that she chose this. She chose Richard over me. She chose the fantasy over the reality. She chose to betray someone who loved her in pursuit of money and status. And I chose to make sure she regretted it. Richard reached out to me once about a year after everything fell apart. He sent me an email through a generic account, asking if we could talk. He wanted to apologize, he said. He wanted to explain his perspective, help me understand that he'd been going through a difficult time, that he never meant to hurt anyone. I deleted the email without responding. Richard Ashford had nothing to say that I wanted to hear. His apologies, his explanations, his justifications, none of it mattered. He'd made his choices and now he was living with them. Caroline Ashford, interestingly, sent me a thank you note. It was brief and formal, delivered through Patricia Whitmore. She thanked me for my courage in coming forward and hoped I was doing well. There was a check enclosed for $25,000, more than enough to cover what I'd spent on private investigators and legal fees. I deposited the check. Caroline and I weren't friends, would never be friends, but we'd helped each other in a moment when we both needed it. Her gratitude was acknowledged. People often ask me if I regret how I handled things. They ask if I wish I'd taken the high road, if I think I went too far, if I ever feel guilty about the role I played in destroying Richard's life and Jessica's future. The answer is complicated. Do I wish Jessica had never betrayed me? Of course. Do I wish I'd never had to become the kind of person who could orchestrate someone's downfall? Absolutely. There's a part of me that mourns the loss of my own innocence, the loss of the version of David West who trusted people, who believed in the basic goodness of his partner, who thought love was enough. But do I regret what I did after I learned the truth? No, not even a little bit. Jessica didn't just cheat on me. She didn't just fall in love with someone else and make the difficult decision to leave our marriage. If that had been what happened, I would have been hurt, but I would have understood. People fall out of love. Marriages end. It's painful, but it's life. What Jessica did was different. She plotted. She calculated. She used our money to fund her affair. She mocked me to her lover, called me clueless and mediocre, laughed about how I didn't suspect anything. She planned to divorce me and take half of everything while already lined up with a millionaire who would make her comfortable. She made me into a joke, into a fool, into someone to be pitied and discarded. And when I found out, I made a choice. I chose not to be a victim. I chose to fight back with every resource I had. I chose to expose the affair, to document everything, to find allies who could help me, to use the legal system to ensure that Jessica's betrayal cost her everything she'd hoped to gain. Some might call that revenge. I prefer to think of it as justice. Richard promised Jessica a life he couldn't deliver. I made sure she understood that those promises were lies. Richard betrayed his wife and violated his prenuptial agreement. I made sure his wife had the evidence she needed to enforce that agreement. I didn't create the consequences Richard and Jessica faced. They created those consequences through their own choices. I just made sure those consequences actually materialized. If there's a lesson in all this, it's probably this. Be careful who you betray. Be careful whose life you treat as disposable. Because the person you're discarding might not be as passive as you assume. They might fight back. They might have more resources, more intelligence, more determination than you gave them credit for. Jessica thought I was comfortable with mediocrity, too wrapped up in my little tech world, to notice her betrayal. She thought I'd be easy to leave, easy to divorce, easy to forget. She was wrong about all of it. I noticed everything. I documented everything. And when the time came, I used everything I had to ensure she paid the highest possible price for what she'd done. Richard thought he could manage 2 relationships, promise one woman the world while staying married to another. He thought he was clever enough, powerful enough, rich enough to make it work. He was wrong too. In the end, they both learned the same lesson. Some people, when betrayed, don't just walk away quietly. Some people make sure you regret every choice that led to that betrayal. I'm one of those people. And I sleep just fine at night. The last time I saw Jessica was at our final divorce hearing. She looked tired, older than her 31 years. The confident, glowing woman who talked about penthouses and Aspen was gone. In her place was someone defeated, someone who'd bet everything on the wrong man and lost. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The judge finalized our divorce, divided our assets according to his previous ruling, and that was it. 8 years of marriage dissolved in 15 minutes of paperwork. As we left the courthouse, Jessica paused on the steps. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might try one last time to explain or apologize or blame me for everything that had happened. But she just looked at me with something like understanding in her eyes. Maybe she finally realized what she'd done. Maybe she finally understood that I wasn't the mediocre, clueless husband she described to Richard. Maybe she recognized that she'd underestimated me in the worst possible way. Or maybe she was just tired. Either way, she turned and walked away, and I never saw her again. I stood on those courthouse steps for a long time after she left, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything I'd done. Was I proud of myself? Not exactly. Pride suggests satisfaction, and I wasn't satisfied. My marriage was over. The life I'd built was gone. I'd spent months orchestrating the destruction of two people's futures. But I wasn't ashamed either. I'd been wronged and I'd fought back. I'd been betrayed and I'd ensured that betrayal had consequences. In a world where too many people get away with hurting others, where affairs often go unpunished and cheaters often end up happy, I'd made sure that justice, my version of it at least, was served. That had to be enough. Today I'm okay. Not great, not completely healed, but okay. I date occasionally, though I'm careful, probably too careful. I've installed security cameras at my new place. I check my partner's phone location more than I should. I have trouble fully trusting anyone. Those are scars that probably won't fade. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I survived betrayal. I survived divorce. I survived the hardest year of my life, and I came out the other side still standing. And I know with absolute certainty that I'm not someone who can be easily discarded. Jessica learned that lesson. Richard learned that lesson. Anyone who thinks they can treat me as disposable, as someone whose feelings and investments in life don't matter, they'll learn it too. Because I remember what it felt like to be a ghost in my own home, to be looked through by someone who promised to love me forever. I remember hearing my wife laugh with another man, mock me, plan to leave me while I stood invisible in my own house. I'll never forget that feeling. And I'll never let anyone make me feel that way again. My wife traded me for a sugar daddy. She thought she was trading up, moving from comfortable middle-class life to luxury and wealth. She thought she'd found someone better, someone who could give her everything I couldn't. Instead, she ended up with nothing. No wealthy husband. No penthouse. No house in Aspen. No comfortable marriage to fall back on. Just the wreckage of her own choices and the knowledge that she destroyed everything for a man who abandoned her the moment things got difficult. And me? I rebuilt. Slowly, painfully, but I rebuilt. That's the real difference between us, I think. When Jessica's fantasy collapsed, she had nothing left because she'd invested everything in that fantasy. She'd burned every bridge, betrayed every commitment, sacrificed every bit of stability for the promise of something better. When my marriage collapsed, I still had myself. I still had my career, my integrity, my ability to stand up and fight for what I deserved. I didn't need someone else to save me or provide for me or give my life meaning. I just needed to make sure that the people who wronged me didn't get away with it. There's an epilogue to this story that I only learned about recently. A mutual friend, one of the few who stayed neutral during the divorce, told me that Jessica tried to contact Richard about 6 months after everything fell apart. She was desperate, apparently. Her job search wasn't going well, she was running out of money, and she thought maybe Richard would help her. After all, they'd been in love, right? He'd promised her everything. Surely he'd at least help her get back on her feet. Richard's response was to have his lawyer send another cease and desist letter, this time threatening a restraining order if she didn't stop contacting him. When my friend told me this, I felt something I didn't expect. Pity? Not much, but a little. Jessica had genuinely believed Richard loved her. She'd believed his promises. In her mind, she wasn't just leaving me for money, she was leaving me for love, for passion, for a man who valued her in ways I supposedly didn't. She'd been wrong. Richard had never loved her. She was an ego boost, a diversion, a younger woman who made him feel powerful and desirable. The moment she became a liability instead of a pleasure, he discarded her without a second thought. At least when I fought back against her, I did it because she'd hurt me, betrayed me, mocked what we'd built together. There was emotion in it, however dark. Richard's abandonment of Jessica was worse because it was emotionless. She simply stopped mattering to him, and so she ceased to exist in his world. In a twisted way, Jessica and I had both been betrayed by the same man. She'd just been too blinded by his money and promises to see it coming. But here's the thing, I don't regret what I did to her. That small flash of pity doesn't erase the months of planning my humiliation, the affair conducted with my money, the mocking conversations about how clueless I was. Jessica made her choices knowing they would hurt me. She just didn't expect consequences. That was her miscalculation, not my responsibility. Sometimes I think about the alternate version of this story. The one where I never overheard that phone call, where Jessica filed for divorce in May as planned, where she and Richard rode off into the sunset while I nursed my broken heart and accepted my reduced circumstances. In that version, Richard keeps his fortune. Jessica gets her penthouse. I get to be the sad, clueless ex-husband who never saw it coming. They win, I lose, and life goes on. But that's not what happened. That's not the story I allowed to unfold. Instead, I heard that phone call. I gathered evidence. I found allies. I fought back with everything I had. And I turned what should have been their victory into their complete and utter destruction. Did it make me happy? No. Revenge doesn't make you happy. It doesn't heal you or fix what's broken or give you back what you lost. But it does give you something else, the knowledge that you didn't go quietly. The satisfaction of knowing that the people who wronged you paid a price. The certainty that you're not someone who can be easily dismissed or discarded or forgotten. That's worth something. Maybe not everything, but something. I'll end this story where it really ended, not in a courtroom, not with lawyers and judges, but in a quiet moment about a year after the divorce was finalized. I was in my new apartment, smaller and emptier than the house Jessica and I had shared. I was unpacking boxes I'd been avoiding for months, sorting through the remnants of my old life. Photos from our wedding. Souvenirs from vacations we'd taken. Cards she'd given me on birthdays and anniversaries, full of promises about forever. I threw most of it away. There was no point keeping mementos of a marriage that had been a lie, at least at the end. But I kept one thing, a photo from our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were on a beach at sunset, arms around each other, genuinely happy. Jessica was laughing at something I'd said, and I was looking at her with uncomplicated love in my eyes. That version of us, young, hopeful, in love, was real. For a while at least, it was real. I kept that photo not because I missed Jessica or wanted her back, but because I needed to remember that I'm capable of that kind of love. That despite everything that happened, despite the betrayal and the revenge and the cold calculation that defined the end of our marriage, I'm not fundamentally a bitter or cruel person. I'm someone who loved deeply and was betrayed deeply. I'm someone who fought back when wronged. I'm someone who refused to be a victim. But I'm also still capable of love, of trust, of building something real with someone who deserves it. That's the real victory, I think. Not destroying Jessica's future or Richard's fortune, though I did both of those things. The real victory is knowing that they couldn't destroy me. They hurt me, wounded me, changed me, but they didn't break me. I'm still here. I'm still standing. I'm still capable of building a life worth living. And that's something neither of them can say. So that's my story. The story of how my wife traded me for a sugar daddy, and how I made sure they both paid the price. It's not a happy story. It's not a story about forgiveness or healing or taking the high road. It's a story about consequences. About what happens when you underestimate someone. About the price of betrayal when the betrayed person decides to fight back. Jessica wanted a different life and she got one, just not the one she planned. Richard wanted to have his cake and eat it too, and he ended up with nothing but crumbs. And me? I wanted justice and I got it even if it came at a cost. Would I do it all again if I could go back? Honestly, I don't know. The version of me that existed before I heard that phone call, the trusting, naive David who believed in forever, is gone. I can't get him back. And I'm not sure the harder, colder David I've become is better, even if he's stronger. But I can't regret fighting back. I can't regret refusing to be a victim. I can't regret making sure that the people who betrayed me understood the full weight of what they'd done. Because at the end of the day, we all make choices. Jessica chose to betray me. Richard chose to make promises he couldn't keep. Caroline chose to enforce her prenuptial agreement. And I chose to make sure everyone faced the consequences of their actions. Those were my choices and I own them. The good and the bad, the justified and the questionable, all of it. I'm David West. I was betrayed by my wife and her wealthy lover. And instead of accepting my fate quietly, I burned their future to the ground and walked away from the ashes. Some people might judge me for that. Some people might think I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person, that revenge is never the answer. Those people have never stood in their own home and heard the person they love most laugh about how clueless they are. They've never felt the specific agony of being traded in like an old car for a newer model. They've never had to face the knowledge that their partner has been planning their betrayal for months, counting down the days until they could leave. If they had, they might understand why I did what I did. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they're better people than me, more forgiving, more capable of turning the other cheek. But I sleep fine at night knowing that Jessica and Richard got exactly what they deserved. And in the end, isn't that all any of us really want? For the scales to balance, for justice to prevail, for the people who wrong us to face consequences? I made that happen. I balanced the scales. I ensured justice was served. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's story, I can live with that. Because in my story, I'm the hero who refused to be defeated. And that's the story that matters most.